The official records of the War of the Rebellion, or often more simply the official records or ORs, constitute the most extensive collection of primary sources of the history of the American Civil War. Cornell University lists the official title as "The War of the Rebellion," a compilation of the official records of the Union and Confederate armies. They include selected first-hand accounts, orders, reports, maps, diagrams, and correspondence drawn from War and Navy Department records of both Confederate and Union governments, Union and Confederate armies. Collection of the records began in 1864. No special attention was paid to Confederate records until just after the capture of Richmond, Virginia, in 1865, when with the help of Confederate Gen. Samuel Cooper, Union Army Chief of Staff Maj. Gen. Henry W. Halleck began the task of collecting and preserving such archives of the Confederacy as had survived the war. In 1866, a joint resolution of Congress authorized the compilation and publication under auspices of the War Department. Eventually, 17 Secretaries of War were involved in the process. In 1877, Army Captain Robert N. Scott was appointed by the Secretary of War as Director of the publications office, War Records. The original title for the records was the Official Records of the War of the Rebellion, and they were later renamed the War of the Rebellion, a compilation of the official records of the Union and Confederate armies, which has led to some lasting controversy over the official name for the war. As finally published, the records consist of 138,579 pages with 1,006 maps and diagrams assembled in 128 books, organized as 70 volumes grouped in 4 series, published between 1881 and 1901. Each of the 4 series of books in the compilation is divided in 2 volumes, numbered from the beginning of the series with Roman numerals. In Series 2, 3, and IV, each volume coincides with the book. In Series 1, however, it was found to be usually impracticable, beginning with Volume 10, to confine volumes as units of content within single books. Volume 10 and most subsequent volumes in Series 1 were therefore issued in parts, distinguished by subsidiary Roman numerals, each occupying a separate book. Beginning with Volume 24, Arabic serial numbers were also printed on the backs of the books issued, although these numbers were not included on the title pages, and are therefore not universally used in citations. Series 1, Military Operations Formal Reports, both Union and Confederate, of the first seizures of United States property in the southern states, and of all military operations in the field, with the correspondence, orders, and returns relating specially thereto. Series 2, Prisoners' Correspondence, Orders, Reports, and Returns, Union and Confederate, relating to prisoners of war and to state or political prisoners. Series 3, Union Authorities' Correspondence, Orders, Reports, and returns of the Union authorities not relating specifically to the subjects of Series 1 and 2. It includes the annual and special reports of the Secretary of War, of the General-in-Chief, and of the chiefs of the several staff corps and departments, the calls for troops and the correspondence between the national and the several state authorities. Series 4, Confederate Authorities' Correspondence, Orders, Reports, and Returns of the Confederate authorities, similar to the Union material in Series 3, but excluding the correspondence between the Union and Confederate authorities given in that series. A final comprehensive index was published in 1901 with remaining additions and corrections. A companion volume, the Atlas to accompany the official records of the Union and Confederate armies, was published in 1895. It included maps of military operations, a topographic map of the area of operations, and some drawings of weapons, uniforms, insignia, and flags. In 1966, the U.S. National Archives began publication of a 5-volume set that comprised an arguably superior index to the Army ORs. Military Operations of the Civil War, a guide index to the official records of the Union and Confederate Armies, 1861–1865, microfilm publication M1026. Introductory material to the guide index offers guidance to readers of the ORS. Documents printed in official records, armies, were copied, for the most part, directly into type from the originals by printers of the War Department printing establishment. These printers had their trade's long tradition of competence inputting manuscript into and correcting errors. They may not have been sophisticated about scholarly requirements for the reproduction of historical documents in print, but they were aware of the sort of problems involved and dealt with them according to shop practice, rich experience, and common sense. A large part of the content of the compilation had already been printed as preliminary prints before the publication project received any proper editorial direction. The sheer bulk of the material involved prevented any meticulous wholesale review of the copying process by the editors responsible for the eventual publication. There were, of course, errors made during the copying process that did not get corrected or noticed in lists of errata. They were generally printers' errors, however, resulting from carelessness, difficulty in reading the manuscript, ignorance of proper names, and the like. Since the documents were printed a second time from the preliminary prints, at the government printing office, it is a wonder that there are not more mistakes of transcription. Editorial tinkering with the texts of documents is a possibility that must be kept in mind, particularly if the subject matter suggests it. There cannot have been much such tinkering, however, for the editors had their hands full organizing the material to go into successive books. The numerous appendixes of material that did not get into its proper place, and the extent of the 5 supplemental volumes can give us some idea of how demanding and distracting this task must have been. The point is that anyone using the Army Records compilation should watch more intently for faults of editorship than for faults of transcription. Some editorial mistakes are inconsequential, but others are egregious. The total of such mistakes is very large. The editorship was not rigorous in any scholarly or scientific sense, it was empirical and relatively uncritical. Because of the enormous volume of material, the lengthy time period of collection and publication, and the constant and continuing process of correction by veterans of both sides still living contemporaneously, the records are perhaps the most intensely peer-reviewed documents in historical publication. Historians have argued that some of the modifications made years after the events have decreased the accuracy of the records and were made simply to enhance personal reputations. An additional 100 volumes of previously unpublished reports and correspondence were published by the Broadfoot Publishing Company of Wilmington, North Carolina, from 1995 to 1999, entitled Supplement to the Official Records of the Union and Confederate Armies, Union and Confederate Navies. Unfortunately, most of the Confederate Navy Department records were lost during the burning of Richmond. Union Navy Department records were preserved, but not until 1884 was work begun by Navy Department librarian, later Assistant Secretary of the Navy, James R. solely to collect and publish. Intending to partially replace missing reports, many personal narratives were collected and included, often gaining Navy researchers incidental access to draft copies of original reports once thought lost. The official title of publication is Official Records of the Union and Confederate Navies in the War of the Rebellion. Series 1 Records of all naval operations including all inland waterways. Series 2 Records relating to statistics and condition of both forces at the outset of conflict. Returns of captured materials and records of naval prisoners of war. A proposed third series was deemed unnecessary. The final volume of Series 2 was published in 1922. The Navy Department did not publish a comprehensive index to these volumes. Other historical sources While the official records are probably the most used of all primary sources for historical research on the Civil War, there are other contemporary published works that provide well-sourced insights not constrained by the types of sources compiled by government. Southern Historical Society papers published in 52 volumes from 1869 to the 1950s. Includes reminiscences and analyses of war experiences by Confederate veterans. Note: familiarity with the historiography is important when referring to articles in the SHSP, which was a major organ in the creation, dissemination and perpetuation of lost cause mythology. Thus, not all material contained in these papers can be regarded as reliable or historically accurate. Battles and Leaders of the Civil War, a series of articles published between 1884 and 1887 in the Century magazine and then assembled into a 4-volume set of books, includes battle studies by Union and Confederate commanders of all ranks, from Ulysses S. Grant down to company officers. Accounts are usually first-hand and often written by an officer actually in command in a subject engagement or campaign.